Blessings and welcome back, everyone, to our 16th episode in 36 and the first decan of Virgo. Happy birthday, Virgo! The dates for this decan are approximately August 23rd through 24th, or September 1st through September 1st and 2nd. I am Elsa, and I'm joined here today again by David Fisher from In the First Place Astrology, and KD Dayton at kddayton.com. Thanks for being here with us, viewers, and thanks for being back, David and KD. So we are here. This is exciting. The Virgo decan is exciting for us. To start us out, we will be working with the Hermit card for all of the decans of Virgo. And in the Hermetic deck, it's called the Magus of the Voice of Light. And personally, the Hermit card is like one of my favorite cards in the tarot in general. I absolutely love it. So I'm very excited. That's probably why I'm so excited about this Virgo decan. And then we've got the Sun as the second lord. So we have a little bit of a continuation from talking about the Sun throughout Leo. But in this case, we're not talking about this Strength card. We're back to the actual formal Sun card. So that is going to give us a little bit of a twist on the way the Sun acts here, especially because we're moving into a mutable Earth sign. Before we were at fixed fire, we're definitely getting like a huge shift with Virgo. And the Sun card, again, is called the Lord of the Fire of the World. And then for this, the minor arcana for this decan is the Lord of Prudence, which is the Eight of Pentacles here. And Austin Coppock calls this a tree-bearing fruit. And T. Susan Chang says it's the little things, which I adore. So yeah, enter Mercury. Enter Mercury is our major lord. So enter Hermit card, which is the mercurial Virgo card, whereas we see the Magician as Mercury in other places in tarot. We see a maiden with fruit. This fruit is a complex process that you can't force, like you can't rush ripeness. So I think, you know, that's going to be like this development that we're talking about here. And we're going to get a lot deeper into some of the significations of the harvest, the changing of the season, the darkening of the light, all of these things as we move through the decans. But in this first decan, we still got the Sun, we've still got this garden-like, fruit-like quality. So a lot of abundance here. We have the idea of tending to the tree of life. Patience is the virtue here. It's slow, it's easy, it's very like humble. And Austin will, I guess, tell us about the ways in which we see this sort of coming about. He talks a lot about it being the willingness to get to know something before acting, where we have this kind of like fire quickness with the fixed Leo fire decans. Here we have like the craft, the process. Like you can think of someone as like eating local, slow food, contemplation, things like this, patience. So I'm going to go ahead, and with that, it's going to be a little bit probably of a repeat, but the way that Austin will guide us through this space. So in this space, we are seeing images of humility before creation. The spirit watches, listens, tends. It's unwilling to impose itself rashly on the order of being. It's putting away of pride, submitting itself to the demands of the craft. In around, I think like the Avanajataka 4th, 3rd century, you know, obviously big question mark. It calls it, or it refers to it as the subtle knowledge of crafts, or those who are attached to beauty and skill. Mindfulness is also suggested by the attribution of the Greek goddess Themis. The 36 layers of this zodiac from the Hellenistic era, this fragmentary text that Austin refers to and we use here, is referring to this goddess Themis or Themis. She was a titaness whose role it was to teach the observances of divine law. She was the goddess of prudence, but also in her role as an oracular goddess, this wise Themis revealed the law of creation to men. She was said to have presided at the famous oracle at Delphi after having inherited the role from her mother, and her mother being the titaness Gaia. She is said to have spoken to those in a trance with the voice of the earth. In the 3 books of occult philosophy, we have a figure of a good maid, a man casting seeds, and it signifies wealth, the ordering of diet, which I kind of want to pin, plowing, sowing, and peopling. So I thought that was really interesting because we see like casting of seeds instead of harvest. We see plowing and sowing, which we saw back in Taurus. We see peopling, which we've kind of seen in Taurus as well, like the kind of spring, like making babies vibe. But I was like, at first I was like, that's interesting because we're bringing in the harvest at this time. But I think it just shows us that kind of opulence of the tree of life again, like that kind of like fertile seed, like tree of life, like quality. The maidens pictured in nearly every work of this Decan are tending to the tree of life. We have here this tension between prudence and delight. Grain is useless if not harvested, and fruits rot if not eaten. So you have this idea of like needing, like kind of the delight and debauchery of like wine and like all the harvest coming in at once. And again, we have to eat it at this time. Not all can be preserved, not all can be saved. So this idea of like being humble, sitting back, but at the same time needing to indulge in the moment. And I think we get that kind of with mindfulness as well, right? Is like we have this in the moment feel of earth that happens here. Just noting also that this is the first time we've seen a quote unquote human sign since Gemini. So you get a little bit of that polarity as well.
And not only that, you have also the first earth mutable sign, and those two energies, if you think of it, mutability, you can even associate it a little bit with water, but more with air in terms of quality. And in terms of earth, you would have to mix two significations, which is stable, something that is self-sustaining and things like that, to the ever-changing circumstances and how that impacts one's sense of self and one's ability to nurture that self. And so here in Virgo, it's the first time that we're kind of dealing with that.
Yeah, that's interesting, David, because I was thinking of, when I think of earth, I think of like the material and the sensation like thing. So the sensual, I'm not talking about like only, the senses that we would think of it, but like when we're dealing with the actual nature of something and sensation. That's why when we're thinking of like mindfulness, you're dealing with the senses that arise. So we're dealing with mutability on the material realm. And when you think of the fact that the material realm is in change or in flux, you definitely do think of that momentary like ripening on the vine. You think of that process of agriculture from seedling to fruit and the storing and weighing and everything of your material goods. So it definitely goes with the season here, the mutable human material or sensational part of earth that is ever changing because of the dying of the light and the harvesting of the crops and needing to eat things while it's ripe. So yeah, mutable earth, I think of like mutable material, like that.
So I think this is a good point to start with the cards. I'm going to start with the sun today. Again, we've talked about it multiple times, so I don't have a whole lot to add, except to note, first of all, we have a depiction of the Pythagorean tarot on the right, which I don't think we've thrown up the sun card before in that deck. So it's interesting to note a few similarities. In the past, we've talked about, you know, the twins being represented on the card, and the nakedness being relevant. But I want to read a little bit of T. Susan Chang's introduction to this chapter in 36 Secrets on the Virgo I Decan. After the desperate measures of the Seven of Wands, we emerge into a drama-free zone. The Eight of Pentacles is a place of well-lit industry and Zen-like focus. Or some might argue it's a crashing bore where every day is the same. Though each of the artisan's pentacles in the Eight of Pentacles, which we'll throw up in a few moments, may appear identical, you can be certain he is honing his craft incrementally with each one. Every detail is another opportunity to hunt down the ideal. He is lost in the trance of perfection, seeing only the work before him. But that work resides the world entire. So why I like this paragraph to start off the chapter is that there are some very important solar terms in that paragraph, including focus, including a industry and being well lit. And I also think that a lot of us with even a basic knowledge of astrology would associate Virgo and this depiction of Mercury with the earth and the mutable as very detail oriented, and to that extent, a little bit perfectionist, which is something that overlaps with the sun and solar themes. So I don't know if you all have anything else you want to say about the sun card, but I think the elements of mundanity and like the day-to-day sun type behavior is really what I want to focus on. And that's why I have in the middle here an image of the Golden Renaissance card, which has a much more kind of home-like daily feeling, a depiction of what the sun can represent in a mundane life. It's just a family.
Yeah, and it reminds me, the middle card really reminds me of like the Virgin Madonna quality of Virgo, right? Is like this ultimate like mother, like this kind of like virginal mother quality of the mundane, caring for the home with this kind of like perfection, where that's kind of like the way that the Madonna is seen, right? Is like this perfect mother archetype, essentially. I wanted to mention with the Pythagorean sun card is, yeah, it's got the Gemini quality. We don't need to get deep into it, but to me, it reminds me of the walled garden that we saw earlier in the season, as well as the circle of mushrooms reminded me of that mycelial conversation that we had. And then David, I think it was in the last, yes, it was in the Martial Decan of Leo, where we saw the left foot dipped into the river. And we see that again here, noticing that quality of the occult and feminine and the nourishment of the waters that sort of feed the material
And
realm.
it's the lovers represented there. So you have her foot, which is the feminine quality within us, connecting to that river, to those inner waters, and that being passed on by the shoulder to the male counterpart, which is with their left foot inside the circle, connecting with her right foot. So it's that passing of the inner knowledge to your conscious mind.
Yeah. So as far as like sun goes, and I was just thinking about, and this is Virgo, this isn't necessarily the sun, but when we think about Virgo as protection, or as, I'm sorry, when we think about Virgo as perfection, there is this story that I always tell when it comes to like Virgo and the perfection. I don't know if it'll come up today, and maybe I'll save it for another decan because I want to elaborate on it a little bit more. And I think what I'm going to focus on today about the Virgo perfection in my mind is the perfection in nature that artists are always trying to re-embody, that we can't absolutely capture by drying the goods or storing the goods. Like there's nothing like that ripe pomegranate or whatever, you know, like there's just no way that we could capture the perfection that we see in the natural world, the blooming of a flower or the taste of a ripe fruit. And I think that that's what we're all kind of like yearning for, is that solar like perfection, right? That natural world perfection, in which all like beauty and abundance arises from. So that's what it really makes me think of when we've got that material aspect of Earth, and then where we've got the Decan being ruled by the sun. So again, that kind of like striving for that godlike ideal of the sun, and then bringing it down to Earth. Like, how do we get, like, what do we love the sun for? Well, it plumps the fruit on the vine, and there's nothing as artistic as like grapes and the leaves and the shadows and the play of the light on a cool autumn day or something like that. There's just no way of recreating that type of beauty outside of nature.
And when you think of Leo, we were thinking about the power of the sun undisputed and those faces answering to that. Here, the sun is answering to the archetype of Mercury, is answering to that Virgoan instinct of feminine quality of being open to the circumstances in a way that allows it to filter what is more like itself. And that is more fulfilling than just trying to fight or impose or just be sun-like all the way. So it is a more comfortable solar expression, if you think of it, than what we were having when the sun was ruling the sign.
Absolutely. And it's also more comfortable because of the fact that it's not like a blazing, it's almost like a slightly more cadence, right? If you think of the sun like blazing in the 10th, you've got some cadency or some drawing away.
It's diffused through
yes.
the multiplicity of a mutable sign.
Absolutely. And that's what gives us sort of like, it gives us a little shade. It gives us all the harvest of our labor. It's like we've toiled in the sun thus far, and here we get it's like it's bounty, essentially.
And that has to do also with that journey inside, but I want to talk more about that in the next card.
Briefly, before we move on from the sun, I do want to kind of latch on to one last thing that you said about the natural world and the beauty of the natural world that Chang references in her chapter on this decan as well, which is she discusses the transposition of the cycle of mortality onto the agricultural cycle. So, you know, many years ago, clearly many years ago, when Demeter is it Demeter that we would say, or Ceres?
Demeter.
Yeah. Demeter was often praised during these times of harvest, and she had a daughter, Persephone, very, very famous story of Persephone going down to the underworld and becoming the queen of the underworld alongside Hades. And this cycle of mortality was transposed on the harvest season. You think of different things coming to ripen at different times. And then, so this harvest season, which is corresponding to Virgo in the Northern Hemisphere, being a time of like peak health, vitality, this sun type energy. But then as we get further on in the year, which again, we'll address more as we go through the decan, the light of the sun dying, just as people die and people wither and people fall into the dark winter of life. Which I think is a great segue to our next card.
Yeah, let's pull it up because there's something I wanted to say about the Hermit, which is we're going to dive deeper into the Hermit card as we go, obviously. So we can't talk about the Hermit without talking about death. We can't really talk about Virgo and the Virgo decans without talking about death. When we get to Virgo 3, we're going to see the sarcophagus. We're going to see, you know, shared rulership with Saturn. And this is the most Saturnine card. In fact, it was misinterpreted to be the Hermit over time. It was actually in the beginning known as the Saturn card, this old man, the Lord of Time. And it was called the card of time, essentially, and death. So we will get deeper into that. And I think KD will talk a little bit more about it when we get to the crone-like nature. But we will belabor this more as we will belabor this concept as we see it blossoming over the Virgo decans, because it's only going to continue to get more and more towards the end of the cycle, more and more dead, more and more of the harvest or something like this. At this point of Virgo, we kind of see the ripening of fruits and everything is there for our abundance. But this does hearken us to the fact that time is ticking. And that's something that the Virgo nature is sort of steeped in. So it's being introduced here in this decan.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people might recognize this figure on the far left from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. At least several years ago, I might have made reference to the cover of the famous Led Zeppelin album, Stairway to Heaven, but instead, I will just say you probably recognize it from somewhere. But I want to talk a little bit about the things that each of these figures are holding in their hands and also relate them back to what Elsa was saying about Saturn. It's very interesting how Saturnine this card is. Especially in this Pythagorean deck here, second from the left, you have the scythe or the sickle, maybe. And this is actually a super interesting reference given what we were just talking about, the transposition of mortality on the agricultural cycle. Think of the Grim Reaper. The Reaper, just like in the harvest, is cutting down the wheat for processing. The Grim Reaper is cutting down the people for their movement on to the next realm, the next plane. So that's a very Saturnine thing, as is the hourglass that you mentioned being associated with time. But also, Chang mentions in her book, never had heard this before, but after doing a little more research, I really love it and I want to, meditate on it more. So I'm saying this to encourage you all to do it as well, that within the lantern, in more modern depictions, such as the Rider-Waite-Smith, as well as the image on the second to the right, you have a lantern in his hand, the hermit's hand. And Chang says that's the sun. The hermit is holding a lantern of the sun in his hand to guide his way and to focus the light on certain things in front of him. So while the hermit is definitely a card of solitude and walking alone, it's a very focused card. It's a very Zen card, and I really appreciated that mention at the beginning of Chang's chapter on it.
Yeah, it does have to do with that, like, meditative, when you think of like prudence and patience and all of those things. I've also heard it being described as the star, which is, also, but either way, the star of the sun or the star card, we've got that kind of idea of lighting in the dark. And again, that sort of like patience, enlightenment, wisdom, inner light, all of those types of, like, that Saturn Sun dynamic again, with like Saturn maybe being the holder of the light this time around, instead of being like shadowed by the light. It talks about that kind of like inner light, that even with the most abundant fruit, there's something in us that says like death is around the corner.
Yep. You'll notice that on the ground of the Hermit card, we have snow, we have some, I believe these are irises on the ground in the Pythagorean card. These are signs of purification and purity and refinement, which is a very interesting thing to remember about the Hermit, especially in relation to Virgo. And the last thing I want to mention is the crone, which is depicted here on the far right. And this is from the Mother Peace deck. I like this depiction, not just because it's really nice to have a feminine take on the Hermit, but because Saturn is in fact mostly referred to as a female planet in very traditional terms. So we have this depiction of a maybe even Hecate. This is sometimes tied to the goddess Hecate, and so this could be her again. The same
The goddess of the crossroads.
Goddess of the crossroads, and she's at the crossroads. The same feeling as the other Hermit cards of a sense of wisdom and inner guidance and needing to look inwards. Hecate was, like a postmenopausal archetype of women. There were not a whole lot of those archetypes in ancient Greek mythology or any ancient mythology. So she really kind of epitomized this, and that idea, if you think back to the sun card that I showed, the middle one, this is the family, the ripe time of life. This is the mother period of life for a woman. When she gets to the point where she's postmenopausal, she's done bearing children, she's done bringing forth the family, there's a new quest to embark on, right? There's a new spiritual inner journey, a totally different type of life that needs to be pursued, because leading up until that point, you know, into maidenhood, even into childhood, they've been told this is what you do. This is what you do. You have children, you raise a family. You have children, you raise a family. And in this stage, you're moving beyond that into something that's extra, an extra stage of life.
Yeah, like
You
a
do
feminine.
see,
Go ahead.
right? I was going to say just that you do see a lot of women getting into this stage of life where everything they wanted to do when they were younger was to raise their family. And once they did go through that, like abiding by modern archetypes and things that people are imposed to in society, they are at a loss. Many of them, they have identity crisis and they feel really neglected and disposed of because they cannot make out for themselves what other purposes they were supposed to have harnessed throughout their experience, right? And so this moment of like going within and repurposing and understanding yourself through a new light is exemplified by that. And I see that also as a continuation in relation to the last Decan, where we had like the tower moment where people just realized that things couldn't be the old way anymore. Now we have kind of a follow-up where you're doing the process of getting to know yourself and selecting the parts of you that you want to integrate this new reality.
Yeah, because again, it's like that patience. It's like now your ego doesn't have anything to prove in a sense. And like, I like how in the mother piece, it's like putting her in robes of purple, which is like kind of a pedestal or like a sign of richness, you know, and she's got the white robe, which is a sign of like purity. So it's almost like exalting the wisdom quality. And then like, you know, KD had mentioned like Saturn is a feminine archetype. It's something that Charles Obert talked a little bit about. I'm not sure where he stands on it now. I'm not sure if maybe we've walked that back a little bit, but I just wanted to mention it because if we see Saturn here and we see the old man Saturn, we see the feminine archetype, maybe the Capricornian version of Saturn as the feminine crone. And we know that Saturn is deeply connected with the moon in its signification, the moon in Shiva's hair, the moon like synth or Sith in the traditional viewing of the old man. And we also see this like the star or the star card here in the crone shooting across the sky and also holding or riding that lunar quality. So I think it's a very, you know, Saturn-like depiction in the female form being really honored here. So it's really honoring that Virgo archetype as well of wisdom, of patience, of turning inward. And that's kind of where the juice is at, is like knowing that, you know, we have abundance now, but if we look within, we know we can't save everything, right? You can't save your kids from growing up. You can't, you know what I'm saying? Like you can't stop time. And the wisdom that comes with the acceptance of that is like a very wise woman thing. Yeah. To love your kids into old age. It's got a different quality than the old man to me. So I really like that they brought this crone archetype into the Hermit.
Yeah, and I want to say one thing.
Pause for a moment. I need to move.
You can move because KD can. We don't see you.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, KD.
The one last thing that I want to say about this, though, just given the conversation we just had, is that as somebody who is not following this like maiden mother crone path in my personal life, I've always identified with the crone, and I've always thought that the crone was applicable no matter what stage of life that you are in. So even though this is kind of a traditional story, the triple kind of like feminine stages, it's a traditional story for a reason, because it does resonate with some people. It doesn't resonate with everybody. And, you know, you can take and leave what is strongly important to you from these cards.
Yeah, and I think that's with the old man too. I mean, it's father time that's always looming. You can experience that in any age. Generally, it doesn't come like with the ripeness of youth. It would come with some ponderance, some time passing. But again, that's wisdom, right? Like you're not necessarily born all wise and all patient. And you know, I also identify with the Hermit or the crone like stage of life, but that's if you're a Saturnine person, you very well might identify with the wisdom archetype or the solitary path, something like that.
Totally.
I just wanted to mention very quick that in the guidebook that comes with the Pythagorean guidebook, the flowers that are at Saturn's feet are called asphodels. And I'm really I don't know how to say that. And I'm going to research that flower a little bit more as we go through. And maybe we can pick up next time with the signification of that, because we have pages and pages and pages of the Pythagorean interpretation of this card that we're going to try to spread throughout the Virgo Decans. So we'll get back to you.
It's a flower mentioned in Harry Potter, actually. It's one of the ingredients to make sleeping potion, the draught of the living dead.
I wondered if it didn't have to do with poison or death or some kind of a flower that would have some signification.
Most powerful sleeping potion, according to J.K. Rowling.
That makes a lot of sense, because Saturn is like sleep in that sense, or sleep is like death in that sense. Did you know how to?
Yeah, if you exaggerate on the quantity, you can kill a person trying to make a sleeping draught.
Yes, exactly. Like that's one of the old lores of magic, right? And even in consciousness talk, in spirituality, sleep and death are synonymous with the same archetype. How do you say the flower?
Asphodels, I think. I'm not sure.
Okay, cool. Really cool to note.
Yeah. Well, and clearly this card is super fascinating. We have lots more to say about it, and we're going to throughout Virgo. And also, if you can't tell, all three of us are very Saturnine people, so it's like our favorite card.
We're all like, yeah.
And actually, this is my rising decanate, so I am here representing all the Virgo ones. Yay.
If you want to see the Hermit in action, no.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. Okay, we are here at the Lord of Prudence, the Eight of Pentacles.
Yes, the Eight of Pentacles. So I grouped together a number of these cards because of their very clear depiction of somebody working on a craft, somebody working very meticulously on something material. A lot of times it looks to be something very detailed, or else requiring a lot of special skill, blacksmithing, metalworking, and it's a process. It's a process that they're refining. Of those 8 coins or pentacles that they're working on the last one, which is hopefully the most perfect, hopefully the best one that they've been working on. And how this relates to both the Sun and the Hermit is that it's basically depicting the need for mindfulness. It's depicting the need for really paying attention to what you're doing and what you're working on. Every detail, very detail oriented. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's incorporating a kind of ritual in order to execute it perfectly, right? It's embodying something, but not because you were born with it, but understanding the value of becoming something through experience, but intentively exerting doing that particular thing over and over again, so you integrate the beingness of that thing or the manifestation of that thing into who you are. So we have this craftsman like doing all these coins, and it's like I keep thinking, you said it's the best one yet. I'm thinking of someone who is spending all this material and time just to learn how to do it perfectly, right?
Yeah, and I also feel like we have this like prudence, this meditative vibe, and that's what I'm one to get lost in craft, and it's such a meditative and therapeutic thing. So whether it's like you're making, looming the rug, you've got this like sort of rhythm that happens, whether you're pounding the anvil, whether you're, etching the same thing many times, or whether you're like painting, making a work of art, or trying to replicate nature in art, again, like as a painter, a writer, an artist. And we see here in the Eight of Coins, this artist, he's actually drawing or painting, and the images that we see there are actually the images of the tarot. So we've got some of this occult-like signification that gets emblazoned into these works of art. And when I first, glance at the Eight of Pentacles, it reminds me of like a talismanic making process, right? Where you're kind of in this window of ripeness, and you're repeating this craft to make this sort of like, this one pentacle perfection, or this energy. And you think of, the accumulation of knowledge and wisdom that's depicted in every single detail within the tarot, and you really get a sense for this type of art here.
It's so interesting. I'm just looking a little more closely at these, because there's also the planetary glyphs under each one of these coins, which don't traditionally associate with the card being depicted in these coins. So we have Mercury, for instance, underneath the star. We have Venus under Temperance. But the one, since this is an 8, the one additional coin is the Magician. It's the magician who has all the resources at his disposal to complete his craft.
It's also the other mercurial card,
yes.
So I find that to be quite interesting as well. And again, mother and child, this familial sense. And again, you see like these sisters crafting together, or sister friends, or sister wives, or however they, these women coming together. And you can, this is the thing, you can just make baskets for utilitarian use, or rugs, or things like this. But we don't see that that's the nature of the human. We see that crafting something with different colors, different shapes that have meaning to the self and to the tribe, and that self-expression happens naturally even in utility, because it mimics nature.
Totally.
Yeah, and I see also like the work that is done here. Like, think about when you're starting a company, your own business. You envision things one way, but when you get to the earth of it, and when you get to the fluctuation of currency and inflation and many other things that encompass having your own business and managing that amount of resource, you have to adapt the plan of what you had envisioned at first, and the becoming, the actual being of that business will be what is possible according to that circumstance. And whereas in Leo, you had that expression that needed to be pure of that thing that came through with the idea, in Virgo, it suffices that the thing is at all, and you're able to materialize it through your efforts the best way you can. This is true being. This is true manifestation according to a more earthly perspective.
Absolutely, the material perspective of that manifestation. And, I'm glad that you brought that up, David, because we see the mercantile nature of this card. So like, yes, you're starting a business, or if you're selling your crafts, or if you're, whatever this artist is doing, whether they're monetizing it, or they're accumulating wealth, or they're just focused on the quality of the product. You've got this mercantile feature. Mercury is the trader, the craftsman, the exchanger, having everything to do with like money exchange.
Merchants and thieves.
Merchants and thieves, yeah.
And when you think of it, like being able to convince someone of the value of what you are selling as well, or even undervaluing your product so you can have a determined outlet for your products to be more noticed, like diminishing the value a little bit so you can give to someone who will be very visible with wearing your product, or something like that when you're sponsoring a brand, for instance. So all of these things, like, whereas Leo wouldn't be able to do that. Leo would be like, no, you're not paying less than $2,000 for this designer's chair that I drew or whatever. The mercantile perspective would be more like, sure, I can start selling more chairs if I sell cheaper to this person now, because they're very visible. More people will want to know where they got it from. So it's more of that adaptation, that you don't need the thing to be perfect. You just need it to be.
Yeah, I really like that. And there's one card that I haven't talked about yet here on the right, which is from the science deck, which we've shown a little love for during this series so far, because of the very creative representation of these cards' meanings. And I see a few different representations here. So this is the Eight of Pentacles, called Drift. And it talks about the tectonic plates, which are pictured at the top, and how they shift almost imperceptibly over time. But that small, imperceptible shift moves mountains. It creates mountains where there were none before. It creates faults where there were none before. It moves oceans, it moves continents, everything changes because of these tiny, imperceptible shifts, which is that detail that Mercury can pay attention to, with the heft and importance that the sun brings as a secondary ruler to this decan. And I also want to point out that the depiction of the earth here and the tectonic plates is in wood. It's cast in wood, which I like to think is a little bit of a reference to this being falling in an earth sign, this decan falling in an earth sign. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just like one more thing I wanted to say that I thought of while David was talking about the craft. It's like, you know, Mercury is bargaining essentially. So let's say you have like a perfect craft, you haven't downgraded it, but you'll sell 3 for 5 or whatever, you know, like you'll give it that kind of, because you've made an abundance for the market. Same like with ripening fruit, like the fruit's only ripe today and we want to get rid of as much as we can. So you can either buy 3 apples, but if you buy a bushel, you get it for the same price as 3 apples, kind of a thing. That's a very abundant mercurial thing, is like, I'm going to make so many of these well-crafted coins that I have enough to go around and I can sell 3 for 5. And I think of that with the baskets, with the coins. The other thing I was thinking about here is like how beauty sells itself. And at some point you want to know the customer and cater to the customer and all of this stuff. But here it's almost like it's in this sun-like quality, which is probably the only decan of Virgo where we're going to get this quality of like this more abundant perfection. And it's like, you don't have to convince anyone that you have the best craft at the market if it's just the best craft at the market. It's just simply the best made and the most beautiful, essentially. Just like a ripening fruit doesn't have to convince you to eat it. The reddest strawberry is the juiciest and the most sugary, or whatever it is. You know, you can easily see, and it sort of like beckons you to consume or to indulge or whatever it is. So the idea of it just like selling itself just brings in that solar quality to me.
And another thing that brings in that solar quality too is that most of these, with the exception perhaps of this group down here, most of these figures are working independently. They're working as one person. They're not necessarily relying on a group of people to get a product out. They are themselves the masters of their craft. They're doing it. And even in this card right here with the multiple women, they're each working on something separate, independently. They're not really working together. They each have their own tasks, whether it's pottery, whether it's working at the loom, whether it's weaving the baskets. They're all doing something different alone together.
Yeah, I know. I was going to mention this sort of like familial one in the Scapini, and the sisters working together in the Mother Peace versus the man, the solitary man, which you see in like the Hermit or the Magician, where you hear in the 8, which is, you know, a slightly different depiction of like family and sisters out at the harvest or out at the craft than it is this solitary thing. But I think it shows the focus, the dedication, the, you know, that kind of aspect. But I did really love the women, you know, crafting together, because a lot of times we would see like the women in charge of harvest and how it was like a woman, like a rite of passage or bonding ritual to like either make all the crafts or go out and take in the harvest and prepare the harvest and wash the harvest and things like this. So I just wanted to bring in that sort of quality of the whole family enjoys the pie, or the, you know what I'm saying? So I did like that that there was those two differences, and I think they both work here.
And you know, now that I'm looking closer at that card too, because we were just having the conversation about the maiden, mother, crone progression. This is also, I think, somehow relevant to this figure sitting here with the child. While the male figure is working on his work of art, she's also working on her work of art, which is the child in this case. And again, it just really speaks to the one sun card we saw at the beginning with the small family, and how that too is sort of an effort on the material plane as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The effort on the material plane. I was thinking that with the craftsmen, like the young man who seems to be crafting alone, and the women out like doing their thing. It's almost like this father is providing, this is a very traditional sense or whatever, but the women had their roles like in the field with the harvest and the children and whatever that was. And then the men had some kind of a role to like provide. So that seems also like there's almost this necessity of craft that you see with this singular man, in the need to provide resources and the ability to do so.
Okay, so I guess it's Pikatrix time now, and this passage this time around says, "There rises in the first face of Virgo a young girl covered with an old woolen cloth, and in her hand is a pomegranate. This is a face of sowing, plowing, the germination of plants, of gathering grapes, and of good living." So yeah, it's everything that we said before, like it's a harvesting your efforts, germination of plants, which means, having the understanding of sowing and reaping, all of those things, future planning as well.
Sorry.
So yeah, I don't have much to add to this phase other than the things that we've said before. Yeah, I think the message here of the abundance with the pomegranate, there is a girl with a woolen cloth holding it, kind of offering that wisdom through abundance, but also like knowing that the winter is coming,
Absolutely. Yeah, because I was thinking also with that pomegranate is like the fruit of the feminine secret or whatever, the fruit of the goddess. And then we do see this we would think of like this young, like female, not in tattered old woolen cloth, right? So that's kind of like Saturn speckling in his like significations through the Hermit.
Persephone.
Yeah, exactly.
Persephone coming back up from the underworld. The pomegranate is a very traditional symbol for Persephone. And if you can imagine, essentially every year for the duration of winter, she's down in the underworld. When spring starts, she comes back up. And then, the harvest cycle starts again due to her mother, Demeter or Ceres. Now, you have to imagine that when she's coming back from the underworld, she's not leaving in like robes of luxury and gold. She's leaving in tatters. That's quite appropriate.
Yeah, and it's interesting with like, you would think of like, the sun is the second ruler of this decan, maybe her bejeweled in like, whatever queenly gold or something like that. But that's not the Virgo archetype. Virgo's like patient, humble, and you can see that through the, nakedness or the tattered Saturn, sprinkles we get here of her not being clad in gold, but her gold being a wisdom from within, a ripe fruit, a natural beauty kind of element.
And talking about the nativities that we brought for this episode, I think that one that embodies the energy a lot is Mother Teresa. For obvious reasons. I mean, this is the solar archetype being embodied through this feminine and religious figure, right?
Very humble figure too. I think that Mother Teresa really epitomizes that as well. She's a great example, David.
She's the perfect nativity here. It's the crone, it's the feminine aspect of the sun, it's the feminine aspect of Saturn. She's hunched, she's constantly giving, she's quiet, and just that religious mother, again, the Madonna, yet the crone. And she's absolutely it. Like we could say Mother Teresa, full stop.
And it's someone that embodies what she is here for. She embodies the primacy of her work, of her position, but she is not dragging attention to her personality. She makes her personality that what she does. And this is beautiful to me because it's like shining a light, like that lantern being directed by the old man onto the purpose of what you were doing. It's like letting the light of Christ shine through you, or whatever. You use your ability to become and to invest in yourself to shine a light on your purpose, on that which you hold as the highest ideal.
Yes, and again, it's that inner light where she's not bejeweled, where the gold is flickering for you to see on the outside. She's like holding this light where it's like an aura. It's coming through the crown. It's coming through the spirituality, through the wisdom. It's coming from within. That's why you see this like purity or virgin or Vestal Virgin, which we're going to get into. But it's that purity and light beaming from within that is the attractive sort of juicy quality, like a fruit would. It's bejeweled in its own nature.
In other words, is you being able through wisdom to direct the light of the self to the things that you want to embody into this world, to manifest physically and materially, in other words, into this world.
It's a really beautiful,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's so sun hermit. That's a really beautiful, yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. It's this beautiful archetype of the sun and Mercury together, and it's like feminine, earthy way. It's gorgeous.
Mercury, after all, is the logos. So it is the process through which you reveal a truth to someone else, and you don't necessarily reveal it only through words or through the most superficial layers of consciousness. You just embody something until through you enacting that, even if you haven't said it directly, other people around you kind of get into the same vibe, or they understand it through your beingness, through the way you move.
And it's this quiet action. It's not the action of Mars. It's not like get out there and do the action. It's the subtle, persistent, patient action that we see as a quality of, as a wisdom quality.
Well, it really feels quite different from Leo 3. Yeah, quite different. And I mentioned one or two more other nativities just because I think that they also get at another side of this combination, which is the detail orientedness and the art. I'm thinking of Tim Burton specifically, who was born during this decan. He's a director known for his very I think beautiful movies. I love Edward Scissorhands. I love The Nightmare Before Christmas, but he has such an eye for what he wants. He creates such a world in his movies that it's very easy to get sucked into. And they're all kind of perversions on the real world, but that detail, that attention to detail is beautiful.
And also
it's in the detail. The devil's in the details.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, the devil's in the details, but he also has this, we're talking about this looming dark quality of like the hermit. He's hooded, it's dark, there's only one like beam of light or whatever. It's like the same kind of like overarching old man quality that you see in the eerie kind of aesthetic that Tim Burton has. And I also just wanted to bring in Edward Scissorhands again, because I believe that he was like somewhat mute or didn't say a lot in the movie. Like his character was very withdrawn and shy, but yet exposed so much. And that's a very like quality we see here, as well as he's in the garden, right? And like just how we think of like we're harvesting here, he's in the natural world, sort of like harvesting or making beautiful the natural or something from his own like artistic wild world. And I thought that was a little bit like the craft here, the craft of the 8.
Yep. And this is perhaps a tangent, but I just really wanted to mention it. I don't know if you can insert this later on or like earlier in the video, but I forgot that T. Susan Chang does reference one of the things that she often finds that this card is associated with, the 8 of Pentacles, with cooking. And I fucking love that as somebody who loves cooking. I think that it's very interesting to consider how much of a craft that can be and how much you have to like work to perfect something. And it's not ever going to be perfect, at least not to everybody, but yeah.
It's also a way of preserving the harvest. And if you think of Saturn, which is prepping for the winter and death, and you think of like this abundant quality of the harvest, there's a lot of ways in which to preserve food. One is cooking, which sometimes can be considered martial, but it could also be considered solar here, and feminine, and like that mother archetype of cooking, as well as drying, which is another Saturn way to do it.
Preserving in some way, you know,
Yeah.
like with canning, with pickling and things like this. I find all those to be, ways of preparing for the winter, right?
Exactly. And done through usually cooking or drying on some level. So yeah, Saturn, Sun kind of polarity here is an overarching theme. Yeah, I love that.
I guess this brings us more towards the close of this episode.
Yeah, let's mention our works, and then we'll have KD take us out with a poem. So we've got my Patreon page, the Hellenistic Astrology Patreon page, where we are doing the study group of Demetra George's Volume 2. So definitely, you can check all of that below. Check out the details of that below, as well as my personal offerings. You can get a hold of me through the About section on this page. I'm doing readings, astrology readings, and elections, and anything astrological, hit me up. I do tutoring as well. And then KD, you're at kddayton.com.
Yes, I'm at kddayton.com. I'm KD Dayton on Twitter, KD_Dayton on Instagram. And starting in this Decan, actually, I'm going to be revitalizing my newsletter, which comes out every new and full moon, and talks a little bit about the seasonal associations with produce that might be in season during that time, and how you can sort of ritualize your experience of the cycles of life through food.
Oh my God, that's perfect for this Decan.
Is it not?
That's you to a T. I love that. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Also my 10th house, so
Nice. Well, I'm sure you'll have success with that. And then David Fisher, you are in the First Place Astrology and the firstplaceastrology.com, as well as you have some handles.
Yes, those are my website, in the firstplaceastrology.com. My handle is the same in the First Place Astrology on Instagram as in Twitter. As for Twitter, I am First Place Astro, at First Place Astro. You can reach me on my website. You can reach me on any of the other platforms, Facebook, here on YouTube, and you will have access to my available services. I also offer tutorings and tarot readings, just like Katie. So if you want to hit any of us up for those services, feel free.
Yeah, that's awesome. And of course,
don't forget to like and subscribe to this video, because we really put a lot of effort into them. If you only knew.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Seriously, if you only knew how many hours went into this little hour that you see, it's quite intense. But yeah, definitely. And thank you all for watching. Thanks for your support thus far. Thanks for commenting. I totally love. I think the comment section is probably what gets me the most lit when you guys engage. So yeah, thank you both for being here, and thank you everyone for joining. KD, do you want to ring us out with the poem?
Yes. So the poem at the end of T. Susan Chang's chapter on the Eight of Pentacles and Virgo I Decan is an excerpt from the sayings of Layman Pang, a Zen classic of China, translation by James Green. What I do every day is nothing special. I simply stumble around. What I do is not thought out. Where I go is unplanned. No matter who tries to leave their mark, the hills and dales are not impressed. Collecting firewood and carrying water are prayers that reach the God.
Beautiful.
So good. Until next time, y'all. Ciao.
Matao kakao samayo napikana soba da soba kena matahiba nakawatima napikana soba and soba ataiba